Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to look at the AERO G from Gigabyte. It's a Z790 motherboard. As you can see from its sleek white packaging and its AERO, basically the name of the motherboard, it's a derivative of Gigabyte's notebook or high-end notebook products, and this time it's applied to a motherboard. So it has like a sleek aesthetic, more on the terms of it feels like it could be an Apple product, to be honest. But it also is supposed to be a performance level thing, and this one is made for content creation, so creator motherboard. It is part of the LGA 1700 chipset, so 13th generation and 12th generation CPUs are fully supported, including the 13900K, so you have no problem with this. This is a DDR5 motherboard, so it has the latest and greatest. PCIe 5.0 is included in one M.2 slot and one PCIe slot, both from the CPU. And we're going to go over that in a second. Now, it does have something a little interesting going on with some of the DisplayPort and output. And it also has DisplayPort input for that output. We'll discuss that in a second. Let's take a look at the board. So we have the AERO in an anti-sag bag. We've taken this out a few times. This is maybe our 10th time going in and out of the box with this thing. But I wrote my 13th generation review with this, the 13900K and the 13600K, and then also a DDR4 Z790 motherboard. But anyways, we have the accessories. Let me get them all out here. They're not too many in number, but I guess in spirit they're a lot. Oh, that was kind of cool. Anyways, you start out with the Wi-Fi antenna. This antenna is white and black, and I believe it's a limited edition specifically for this motherboard. It's for the Wi-Fi 6. It has a magnetic base, although it does seem weighted enough that it could probably stand up on its own like that. This does seem to be... This is kind of cool. I mean, it looks sleek. I mean, I told you, like an Apple product. Anyways, so we have a DisplayPort cable here. This is male to male. As you can see by the markings here, maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. This goes into the motherboard, okay? And then this side plugs to a graphics card, external or plugged in on the inside. Well, plugged into the motherboard directly, or maybe an external one if you have, this motherboard doesn't have Thunderbolt, so, but there is Thunderbolt AIC on this motherboard. Anyway, AIC card, header, not a card, a header, so you can add it in. But anyways, so you can determine exactly what is outputting to the Type-C DisplayPort port, which is actually a Type-C display port. So it's a Type-C 10 gigabit per second USB 3.2 Gen 2, and it has an alternate DisplayPort capability, but there is a multiplexer on the motherboard, so you can switch between DisplayPort generated by the chipset from internal graphics, or you can choose to use an external graphics input for different capability options. Or if you have like a KF CPU with no internal graphics, you can use an external card to still maintain graphics output capability, and that capability can include something like a pen. There's a manual for that. Two SATA 6 gigabits per second cables. Most of them are straight end on both ends, except one cable has one right angle, 90 degrees connector. Okay, this is a warranty manual, and you see a list of Gigabyte Z790 motherboards. The Tachyon should be pretty cool. Here's the vision link. That's the capability I was telling you about with the DisplayPort. So here are the modes. Yeah, it's pretty short, but it's just to the point, and you can put it into like a pen display, which is I guess what it's made for creators, like if they want to draw or something. The display is not included. So I guess to maintain compatibility with a bunch of different types of pen displays, the Gigabyte's offering you the ability to input a different type of video signal to the alternate Type-C display port. So you get USB 3.2 Gen 2, and you get your so you get the good connectivity with the good video output. So you got all that explained in this. That's the only manual that comes with it. This is the last thing we're going to cover. Now, this motherboard does have thermistor headers, so some of the other Gigabyte motherboards, especially in the Aorus gaming lines, they have the ability to take a thermistor. So does this motherboard. It has two of them, but this one also has a microphone port, just like a lot of other Gigabyte ones. And you can mount this anywhere and plug the microphone into the motherboard, into a special header I'll point out in a little bit. And you can basically gauge the noise in your case and be able to control your fans, not only based on temperature, but noise is an option as well. So it gets a decibel reading. It doesn't actually record you. That question has been asked a lot, and I actually asked it when this first came out as a feature because, I mean, yeah. And they said no, it just records a decibel level, so. Anyways. here's the board. So we're going to take it out of its anti-static. Hopefully for the last time here. I mean, I do these videos in one take. I don't really have a script, so I have a little cheat sheet of chips because I really can't see them from up here. But besides that, I have to become pretty familiar with the motherboard to be able to do this. So it does take a little bit of time. I would have done this earlier, as in last Friday or this past Friday, or maybe even Thursday, the day of launch. But my sister's wedding was this weekend, so I had to attend that. And I just got back today. Anyways, so we have the AERO and we see the AERO, and we see like it's kind of designed to be like in a plane. This is pretty smooth here, and there's a little slant. And when we take this heatsink off, this cools 4 M.2 heatsinks right here. This is a heatsink for 1 M.2. This is a PCI 5.0, and all the PCI 4.0 M.2s are here. But this one actually looks like a wing. These are pretty cool. They have a little bit of a holographic reflection. They don't light up. This motherboard doesn't have LEDs. It is a creator motherboard. It's not a gaming motherboard. It's not supposed to be all snazzy and stuff. But it does have 4 RGB LED headers, 2 addressable, 2 traditional. And so anyways, VRM, Gigabyte does not advertise this VRM online for some reason. This VRM is pretty good. Definitely enough for a 13900K. You got 16 plus 2 plus 1 phase. 1 phase for the graphics that's over here. 16 in a doubled way just by doubling, like a twin or whatever anyone wants to call it, twin method. And then you have 2 for the auxiliary, which is basically everything else in the CPU other than the CPU core. So that's that. But let's start out with this, okay? This is your power connectors, 8 plus 4. You don't have to plug in both. I actually just plugged in one. I was able to push way more than 300 watts through that one with 13900K. But the second will be great. It depends. This is really, the amount of power that can be pushed through these is limited by the weakest link, just like everything else in this computer, right? So storage is usually the slowest thing on a computer. Used to be optical drives until storage. But same thing with power. So the gauge of the wire used, the quality of the joints and the soldering, the quality of the connectors, PCB copper, stuff like that is really limiting factor. It's not just, oh, this connector. These connectors are like guaranteed to do 300 watts. They can do more if you want, but here you have more than enough on air. And then if you do go colder, or anything above ambient, this is fine. If you do go a lot colder, this motherboard should be okay, because I mean, when you go colder, you are cooling these down, and heat's the most constraining factor in most cases. But I don't know. This is not made for liquid nitrogen, but I'm pretty sure it could probably take it a little bit. So anyways, the VRM heatsinks are very nice. They also have an AERO design, so like they have curved edges, so I'm less likely to cut myself dealing with these, although it's a little sharp. DDR5 slots, 4 of them, pretty standard. Let's start with these. These are fan headers. The motherboard has 8 fan headers, okay? Each header, all of them, support up to 2 amps. And all of them are hybrid. They can do DC mode or PWM mode, okay? So you got a CPU fan header, CPU optional fan header. 2 RGB headers are located here and 2 in the lower left corner of the board. But here, these are normal RGB and then 3-pin in a 4-pin format for addressable, which is common these days. Here you have more fan headers, 2 of them. These are pump headers, so they should run in PWM mode by default. Here you have a EC temp sensor header. That's 1 of 2, and the thermistor cables and the little thermistor at the end of them, they're not included in this motherboard, but they really shouldn't be hard to find. A lot of motherboards have this feature now. So we do have a normal USB 3.2, we used to be called 3.0, USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is 5 gigabits per second. This is one of the ports directly from the chipset, new capabilities. So it's a USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2. This is a 20 gigabits per second internal header, and it's from the chipset. Here you have 2 headers. They're like GPIO, SM bus, stuff like that headers. So you can add in cards, because this motherboard does have 2 PCIe 4.0 by 4 slots directly wired to the chipset. So if you have like a Thunderbolt card or something, or a USB 4.0 card, and you need to connect to the chipset through an SM bus or something, or a GPIO header, they're here, okay? This is that little header I was talking about for the microphone. It has a jumper in it, which means not in use. Don't remove this jumper unless you plug in that microphone. All right, this basically shorts out that circuit, and that microphone picks up noise levels by it's different pressures create different resistance in that thing. So yeah. Oh, almost went over these. These are little status LEDs. So when you boot, they switch among each other to let you know if you're basically something is failing. So if it hangs on CPU, something's wrong with your CPU. It hangs on memory, something's wrong with your memory. Hangs on graphics, something's wrong with your graphics initialization. Something wrong with like I/O and stuff, or storage, or boot. I think is the boot is the last LED. Something's wrong with your boot, or it just ends on boot. But after you boot up, they all go blank. All right, 4 SATA ports. They're all connected to each other. Here you have a multi-key. Now a multi-key is basically, it's Gigabyte's idea of a reset switch, so it's labeled reset. But why would they have a reset switch on the motherboard? No, this is so if you want to mess around. The reset, it can be a reset button, that's fine. But it can also do 3 other things. So it can do a reset, it can control RGB modes through the headers, like the header RGB mode, but just click of the button. It can be a safe boot button directly into the BIOS, or directly into the BIOS. So those 3 things, safe boot, directly into BIOS, RGB, or reset. Okay. Now, front panel headers, standard Gigabyte layout. Clear CMOS header right here, clear CMOS battery right here. This header right here is another EC temperature sensor, so I said this motherboard has 2, that's the second one. 4 of system fan headers, same specs as before as the other ones. All can be either PWM or voltage mode, so they do all the modes, and they're all 2 amps. This is a QFlash Plus button. This motherboard does have QFlash Plus, which is great because let's say you don't have, well, actually you don't need to worry about that. All Z790 motherboards can support 13 gen off the bat. But let's say something happens to the BIOS and you mess up flashing it through Windows or through the UEFI. This is your recovery method. This can flash the BIOS for you. You just follow the instructions on Gigabyte's website. You basically download the correct BIOS. You put it on a specially formatted USB drive. You rename it to something like gigabyte.bin, you plug it in the right USB port, you hit that button, little LED right next to it will light up and indicate how flashing is going, and it uses its own dedicated controller, which is located right here. Anyways, 2 USB 2.0 ports right here, okay? These USB 2.0 ports are pretty handy for stuff like all-in-ones and stuff. They usually use that, or like if you have an external fan or LED controller type thing. These usually come in handy. Anyway, this is your trusted platform module header. 2 more RGB headers like I discussed earlier. Your normal RGB and your addressable RGB. Here's a demo header for LED demo. Like in a store, they might plug in this to like a USB battery pack. It's a 5-volt header. You put in 5 volts to the motherboard lights up. You don't need anything else to light it up. I don't know why they actually soldered this on for these models, but maybe it's just a thing. It's easier not to change a production line for one little thing like that. COM header. There's actually a chip added to make sure this is in there. And this is your HD audio port. Okay, so I think the next natural step is to take off these heat sinks and take a look at the variety of M.2 slots we have on this motherboard. So I actually, I really like Gigabyte's Aorus gaming brand, but I gotta say this AERO stuff is growing on me. I've been working with this board with the new CPUs, and I haven't really hit flaws. There's certain things I'm not a fan of, but they're very just my own preference. These are thermal pads, pretty nice. As you notice, there are top thermal pads, but there are no bottom thermal pads like some of the higher-end Aorus boards have. This is your Wi-Fi. This is an Intel AX211. Okay, so it's wireless 6G, wireless AX, 160 megahertz band, I believe. And you have these quick switches, or quick latches, so you can install the M.2 drive, pull back, put it down, let go, locks in place. When I remove it, pull back, pull out. You can move these around. So, there's that. So, you do have these. Let me remove this one too. This right here is the heatsink for the CPU connected PCI 5.0 port. Now, you're wondering to yourself, because some people did speculate that the 13th gen CPUs would have more PCI 5.0, but that's just not true. Gigabyte is sharing those lanes for this M.2 slot that this cools. This is a pretty hefty heatsink. I guess PCI 5.0 M.2 drives are pretty hot. I actually don't have one. I should probably get one. At least for the written parts of these reviews and performance. So it has a thermal pad and everything, and yeah. I don't think I've seen M.2 heatsink without a thermal pad. I don't know why I keep saying it. Anyways, let's take a look here, okay? So we got all these M.2 slots, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then obviously this key for the Wi-Fi that's already installed. You can install an M.2 drive right here, no problem. I've done it before. Okay, so this one is a Gen 5 slot, okay? By 4 PCIe Gen 5. Okay, so it's by 4 PCIe Gen 5, right above the CPU thing. These two redrivers here actually, they're redrivers and switches. So the ladder 8X right here, this 8X is wired to the CPU directly. This 8X here comes from these two redrivers slash switches, and it switches on and off with this. Well, not on and off. It switches between. So if you plug in a PCIe drive in here, even if it's not PCIe 5.0 M.2 drive, it will take 8X away from here. You can't have like a 12X connection, so it takes all 8 and switches it here. It's a all or nothing type thing. But so if you don't have a PCIe 5.0, I recommend you install in this M.2 slot, because this M.2 slot's also routed to the CPU, but it's PCIe Gen 4, okay? If you put any drive in here, it's going to take this down by 8. Okay, so your graphics will operate at by 8, whatever your graphics card can negotiate. So if you have a graphics card that runs PCIe 3.0, it's not going to run with 5.0 bandwidth. It has to negotiate that PCIe link speed. So, yeah. But I mean, some graphics cards see no difference with that much PCIe 3.0, maybe a few percentage. But just keep that in mind, okay? It's not a huge deal. This motherboard is created for content creators. It's not created for 3D benchmarking. So, but I mean, the slot still gives you full by 16 for the GPU. This is a PCIe 5.0, 4.0 from the graphics card, this M.2 slot. Now these three, 1, 2, 3, they're all PCIe 4.0 directly routed to the chipset. However, this one also supports SATA, okay? So this is SATA, and then also PCIe by 4, 4.0, and so is this, except without the SATA. And they're all routed to the PCH separately. So PCIe layout, by 16 directly to the CPU. Each of these are PCIe 4.0 slots. They're each by 4 electrically, so like from here to here. And they're for expansion cards and stuff. You got a 4K capture card, put it here. You have a Thunderbolt card or USB 4.0 card, put it here. You have space enough for both. So that's really handy. Okay, so we went over that, and I think without taking the heat sinks off, there is one more. Oh, yeah, the I.O. The I.O. is probably important. Okay, so here we have the I.O. Starting with 2 USB 2.0 ports, okay? Then you have your Wi-Fi antenna here for Wi-Fi 6. As you see, it's actually labeled for you. Everything's labeled for you. These are USB 3.1 or 3.2 Gen 1, 5 gigabits per second. They're blue, okay? Gigabyte's pretty standard, not standard, they're consistent with the colors they use on their rear I.O. So blue means 5 gigabits per second, black is traditional USB 2.0. Then you have your Type-C port here. Let's make sure that's it, yeah. Oh, no, you don't. Okay, these are graphics. HDMI output, HDMI 2.0, and this comes from the obviously integrated graphics. This is a DisplayPort input, not an output, okay? So basically, this will go to it goes to a multiplexer, and then basically, that multiplexer can output it through the alternate Type-C port, which is also a 10 gigabits per second USB 3.2 Gen 2 port. So that's where your display comes out for a display port. And it'll work without actually having this output in there. It'll just go from the graphics from the integrated graphics. But you can also add additional graphics instead, which might be of different features or something. Or if you're using a CPU without a graphics card, you can still get graphics to this. Plus this is data for normal USB over with graphics at the same time. So if you're going to like a pad, you're probably going to need to use a port like this. You have another Type-C connector here. This Type-C is 20 gigabits per second from the chipset, and this is USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2. And then you have two Type-A ports right here and here. Like I said, red is 10 gigabits per second, so it's USB 3.2 Gen 2. Then you have a 2.5 gigabit Intel LAN, the I225, I believe. You have a headphone in and out, or well, microphone and output, and then you have S/PDIF in and out. So that's the rear I/O. Let's take this thing apart. Okay, you know what? Let's start with the chipset. 4 screws here. They're equally weighted a little bit. Now the chipset is a bit more fragile, just as it always is on Intel motherboards and AMD. They use actual bare silicon die on there. So if you crush a corner, you're out of luck. Oh, out of luck. So you want to be careful taking it apart. I relieved pressure here, then I went here and there and there and then cross. So I prefer to cross a little bit. I could have done it much more gently, but it is what it is. Okay, now that we got that off, that's out. There is some kind of paste here. Does seem like it did do some molding when it was on, which is good. That's what you expect. Simple, to the point, simple. The chipset isn't really like power hungry, so. Well, it does put out some heat, but it's not like hungry. Anyway, so you got your SMT DIMMs right there. And now these four heatsink screws hold down the heatsink. So we're going to take that apart. All it takes is 4 screws to get this thing off, which is actually really handy because, yeah. Okay. Alright. And that's... And then these two, well, there's 3 that hold down this. This goes in the I/O shield. The I/O shield is basically screwed into the plastic I/O cover, and then it's secured at the top by the I/O cover. So it's like one big system that works in unison. And when putting it back together, it's also kind of like the chicken and the egg, which one goes in first. I/O shield goes in first. And, well, actually, it could go in last. See, chicken and the egg. Anyways, alright, here we go. So, VRM heatsink. As you can see here, there's a little bit of copper you can see sneaking out. Oh, and this one, oh, never mind, I put this on the wrong side. This little thermal pad came off last time. This motherboard does cool the inductors and the heat stages. So the power stages are cooled here, as you can see. And the inductors are cooled here and here. Yeah. So this is the heatsink. It's pretty big. As you can see, the copper here, that indicates that it is a bare copper touch. So the copper is right at this level here, and then it goes direct touch to the heat pad, which goes and cools down the power stages, which Gigabyte did not mention in its marketing. This motherboard uses, I believe, 70 amp power stages. I don't know why you wouldn't put that in marketing. 70 amp is nothing to blush at. So, but I guess in this day and age, everything new is coming out with 100 something, and I'm like, yo, you can't sustain 100 on air on a single stage. Good luck with that. But yeah, these are pretty good. You have the whole VRM here, like I described. One face here. This is for the graphics. Then you have 8, and then 2, 4, 6, 8. Yep, exactly. 16 for the CPU. And then here you have your auxiliary, which is very important. I mean, I guess they could have just called this Uncore. Anyways, I'm going to zoom in real quick, and so we all get a closer look at what's what. Alright, so now that we're up and close, we're going to take a look at the basically the power system first. This is an on semiconductor VRM, so instead of Vishay/Renaissance or IR/Infineon, we have on semiconductor. On semiconductor controlled here, a PWM outputting 8+1 phases for the V-core phases. There are 8 PWM phases. Each phase is doubled through like a twin mode, so one PWM phase goes through 2 of these power stages. This is an NCP PWM. It is the NCP 81530R. Okay. Now those each go to NCP 70 amp power stage for the CPU. So there's 16 power stages. So each set of 2 power stages gets 1 PWM from channel from the main controller here. So basically we get 70 amps from a bunch of FDM F5062, 70 amps. Okay. And if we scoot on over here, we have this, which is, I believe, a 55 amp for the graphics power. It's a NCP 302155, okay? And then if we move over here real quick, we can see that these two here, let me get it right there. These two here are, I believe, 60 amp power stages from onsemi. They're NCP 303160, okay? Auxiliary power for the CPU is important. It's basically what used to be like an Uncore voltage or system agent or whatever was really high back then. They're controlled by their own PWM here. This is a monolithic power systems PWM 2940A. Basically, I've seen this board for this chip for years, used on motherboards for auxiliary power, stuff that's like, needs to be there but needs a small footprint. Now let's go in our rear I/O and take a look like this. That way you guys can have a better view. This chip right here, this chip right here, that's an on semiconductor USB power delivery controller. That's the NCP81239. Now the thing is that you see all these little like MOSFETs here, these little tiny ones. Those are like, they're basically N-channel MOSFETs, and they work to provide power delivery for some of the USB ports. All right, moving on real quick. You have a Realtek controller here. This is a Realtek. Let's see if we can do it like this. That'll be a better angle for everyone, yeah. Okay, this is a Realtek controller. This is a RTS 5411. These 4 USB ports right there, like I pointed out, they basically get one port to go to this Realtek thing, and then they're a hub. It's a hub. It's a 1 to 4 hub. So that's where these 4 USB come from. Here you have your DisplayPort input and the HDMI right underneath it. And this right here is a Texas Instruments chip, and it's also a multiplexer, and it's a video signal switch. It's a Texas Instruments TS3DU642, so it's 12-channel MUX/DMUX, and it switches between the internal graphics and the input from this. Now, it doesn't end there with the graphics, okay? Right here, this little chip, where is this? This is a graphics HDMI 2.0 / it's a redriver and a multiplexer for HDMI. So basically, it redrives and it level shifts. So it changes the voltage level while redriving it. It's a Paracom PI3 HDX 1204. Okay, that's what this is. This tiny little chip right here, that one, that's a PI2 DPX 1066. That's a Type-C DisplayPort alternate mode redriver, okay? So this basically gives that Type-C port that's right under here, that one, the one like all the way down there for the alternate mode, it redrives that controller chip, okay? Now we're not totally done with that port yet. Here we have a RTS chip, Realtek chip. This is a RTS 5450. Now this is a higher end power delivery Type-C 10 gigabits per second, basically controller. So this basically controls that alternate mode thing. There's redrivers and there's a video mode switch, redriver, and the power delivery for that one Type-C alternative mode 10 gigabits per second USB 3.2 output. So Gigabyte put in a lot of hardware just for that single port, more than they did for the 10 gigabits per second port. We'll get to that in a second. We also have a PI3 EQX 1004. That's a 10 gigabits per second redriver, because there are 2 Type A USB 3.0 Gen 2s, USB 3.2 Gen 2s that are 10 gigabits per second. They're red on the back, they're Type A's. That they have their own redriver. Then we have a single redriver, a PI3 EQX 2004. That's very common, and that redriver along with this is used, this is a IT8851. That's a Type-C controller. That and the redriver are for the 20 gigabits USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 on the rear. And then this tiny redriver is the 1004 redriver for the 2 USB ports, the Type A's. Anyways, so now that we're done with that, let's get to our LAN. As we said before, it's an I225, I believe. However, you should keep in mind that it doesn't say I225 on it. It has a SS spec written on it, but this is that chip, and it does have its own BIOS ROM, so this is standalone. It's not a PHY. A PHY is a physical layer device. So if you think about the communication stack for Ethernet, there's a physical layer, and this is usually you just see the device and the controller integrated into that, but this is a standalone, I believe. This is an IT Super I/O. Let's see exactly which one it is. Okay. This is the main IT chip. Actually, did I even write that one down? Because it's not that. No, I didn't. Anyways, this is the main Super I/O. It's an IT 86 something. I'll look it up. This is the main Super I/O. I just can't see that far. So that's the main Super I/O. This is a ALC 1220. The ALC 1220 is a well-known chip. It's used for audio, and You got some audio capacitors, some like isolation. It does give you the SPDIF on the back. I know a lot of motherboard vendors are really not putting in that whole 7.1 output audio. You got a one input, one output, and then you have S/PDIF, so at least you can go digital or optical digital. Anyways, you do have a front panel header, so that's all good. This is a drivers and receivers chip from Texas Instruments right here. It's common, seen this for years. It's for the COM port. So, this right here, this little hidden IC, let's see if you can see that. This little hidden IC here, that's an IT8792 or 952. This is definitely used to expand fan control, temperature, stuff like that. Okay. Now, remember how I told you about how this slot switches by 8 with this M.2 slot right here? That's these two are responsible for that. These are redrivers and multiplexers. They're from a company called Lorraine Tech. Okay, they're one of like 3 big vendors for you got like Phison, you got Lorraine Tech, you got Texas Instruments. That's usually what you find these days for USB 5.0 redrivers. These are the JYS 13008, and they're redrivers for Gen 5 and their switches. They're MUX/DMUX, so all-in-ones. Yeah, 2 of them for 4 lanes. Okay, that's pretty cool. We already said this is your Type E slot. It doesn't block this port. This is a AX212. Here we have a single BIOS ROM, and it is a, I believe it's a MXIC, 256 gigabits, so or megabits, so 32 megabytes. Here we have our BIOS flashback chip that works with that, and the button here, and the BIOS ROM here. This is a very common IT. This is an IT5701. It's used for QFlash Plus. So basically, this is a controller, a microcontroller that can basically mimic a system and allow the flashing of this BIOS without a CPU or memory installed. Okay, a bunch of stuff for the fan headers. No need to go over those. There's not too much going on in this motherboard otherwise. Oh, USB. Okay, remember how we saw that little redriver for 20 gigabits per second? Well, we got one here for this Type-C header, and we got that same IT controller. So this is the PI3 EQX 2004, and this is the IT 8851. And so you got that. Now, there's one thing we didn't go over yet, and that's power delivery for DRAM. We should have probably done that. Now, you have a bunch of little controllers here, okay? So you got 2 sets of them here. Yeah, where's the other one? Okay. Here. This little chip, I believe. Yeah. This little chip right here is, I think I added it. Which one has the 2 coming out of it? Okay. DRAM is from 2 little chips. I don't want to keep saying, oh, okay. There's one that's a JW5068A. It's a 8 amp 16 amp single buck regulator. And then you have this little chip here. There's one 9F. It equals 9F, and that's an RTQ 2823A. It's another buck converter. They just basically, this is definitely for memory. It's just like a single phase type thing, all integrated, MOSFETs integrated and everything. So basically that's for DRAM and stuff like that. There's not much to go over other than that. This is a pretty straightforward board. Most everything is integrated into the Z790 PCH. So, yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. The motherboard's solid, and I know Gigabyte doesn't put much on its website, but its voltage regulator is solid. I've tested it myself, okay? So no need to worry about this board's VRMs in case Gigabyte doesn't advertise it for some reason, but it's there, and it's good. But they don't really want people to associate their high-end products, all of them in the same thing. They want this to be targeted towards power users, creators, not necessarily liquid nitrogen overclockers. So that's the dig. But I gotta say, this is really nice aesthetics. I like the heat sinks a lot. Alright, so if you have any questions or comments, please do that, and yeah, the subscription thing if you want. Alright,